Kafka, the creator of the term Kafkaesque, the renowned author himself, the person who made the story about the guy who turned into a giant cockroach. Yes, that's right, a giant cockroach. But why, you may ask, why would anyone do that? My name's Detective China, and it turns out that the text Mr. Franz Kafka wrote named The Metamorphosis has a lot of interesting meanings to the point which has struck a lot of controversy in public and with himself. I'll be diving into this fascinating story and be looking at one of these incredibly deeply hidden meanings. The story of Metamorphosis is very simple. A man, Gregor Samsa, wakes up one day to find himself transformed into a giant cockroach. He doesn't care a single bit because he is extremely stressed out by his financial state and not at all concerned by his physical state. Long story short, his manager gets angry at him, he fails to squeeze through a door, annoys his family, gets hit by apples, meets three men, I'll talk about them in a second, suicides by self-starvation, and his family folks at a park somewhere. The story itself holds a rich context of the capitalist society and explains several flaws that the system holds. Just to go through a few, the struggle of the lower class and the great power vested into those upper. But I don't want to talk about Gregor, no. I would like to talk about his sister, Greta. Now, for those who didn't read The Metamorphosis, I suggest you do read it. One, because it's extremely hard to understand, so it's best for you to experience it for yourself. Two, it's a pretty fun read if you have time to spare and read 3 chapters. The character of Greta is one that holds several values and attitudes of those that you would expect from a young woman in the good old days of the early 20th century. And that's the issue, right there. Greta could be practically explained as the embodiment of the treatment of women her age in the capitalist system. And no, it's not all fancy-dandy. Her family is quickly seen throughout the story, specifically the second chapter, to be dispatched from work, with both her parents having a form of physical restraint which disallows them to work, and her brother being a giant insect. So not only does Greta have to supply housework and serve the family, but she also has to work to support the family of forced finance. Now for some more context. In the age of the early 20th century, women were slowly but surely making their way to being equivalent to their gender counterparts. Now the key word there is slowly. Women were given a bigger variety of occupations that extended from just being a mother or a housemaid, especially during the time of one incredibly important war. Women had the ability to serve as cooks, mechanics, and even in police forces, though the role of women was still heavily tied to working in the household. This is true in Greta's case, as it is mentioned in the story that she is doing all these things along with practicing her violin as an instrument. Now, this doesn't sound so bad. But job opportunities aren't the only things related to rights, obviously. Throughout the third chapter of the novella, the Sams family is housing 3 gentlemen, also simply known as lodgers. These lodgers are the practical examples of the authorities of a capitalist society. They are bold, brutal in their judgment, and by far annoying to all of the Samsa cast characters. These men are first heard of in a scene for dinner, where after receiving food from both Greta and her mother, they poked around with the food, evidently to determine whether it was sufficiently cooked or whether perhaps it should be returned to the kitchen. These are direct words from the text that help explain the values and attitudes that the men maintain. In another scene, the men are seen lying around in their room and doing whatever men did in those days when they hear Greta practicing her violin in the kitchen. The men walk up and ask, wouldn't the young lady care to come with us and play here, where it's so much more relaxed and comfortable? The father then replies yes, as if he were the violinist. These 2 quotes from the story are very integral to what I'm going to explain next, because it is not mentioned in just Lodgers, but also Greta's father. When the Lodgers came up and abruptly interrupted Greta's practice, they mentioned that they would like her to come to them, meaning that they see her as a form of entertainment. Her father, who does not ask Greta whether she is comfortable with this, immediately answers yes. Possibly not on behalf of her, but for his own satisfaction to satisfy those higher than him on the social spectrum. This may all allude to the objectification of women in those days and them being seen as possessions or talents rather than actual people. They were seen merely as trophies or proof of one's status in the hierarchy. This dehumanization is as terrifying as Gregor's transformation into his new grotesque form, for not only has Gregor changed but also his sister Greta. In the start of the story, Greta was seen as a sweet, innocent child with a simple life. Such a simple life that she had time to tend to her brother and feed him. However, as the story progresses, it is clear to see that Greta has somewhat comfortably adapted to the current capitalist society and it will take her all, as it states in the story's closing words. The time was also ripe to find her a good husband, which definitely notes to the fact that she will travel on the same path, or a similar path, of a woman in her time. So, is France objectifying women? Not really. If anything, he is just informing us of the problems and mayhem a capitalist society can have on some people. In a weird way to say the least, but I believe it's quite important for there to be some knowledge and representation of the values and attitudes of females, and after close analysis, Greta's resemblance of that nature is delivered quite well.